Angus, is that you when you were a little kid?
Yeah.
It's Van Gogh.
Hi, I'm Angus. I'm going to talk calmly and in a measured tone. Just for something different. It's usually me who shouts and screams. I'm impressed. You've upstaged me, gents. Jos, I want to do something with Tearing with you next year because there's weird stuff happening in Western Australia is Tearing in action. And also, I'm talking about follow-up. There was actually a good publication by Brown Noble last year on SEA follow-up, which concluded that Tearing worked in the case studies he looked at. So that was interesting. But I thought of, one of the things I like about IAIA is I come to these conferences and I have fantastic conversations, get lots of great ideas, and it's where I do most of my research ideas from. So I've come up with a couple of names for some papers, gents. Paper with you, Jos. The Tears of Tears tears IA apart. For you, Bill, scoping the role of courage in impact assessment. Isn't that what we lack? Is courage, isn't it? To actually take that courageous step to say, no, we're going to limit it to these factors. That's what I see as a lack of courage. And for you, Francois, screening, sheer madness in South Africa. This would be a paper documenting how there are more EIAs carried out in South Africa every year than there are number of pages in the largest EIS in the world. That's quite an achievement. So, I'm really supposed to officially talk about the orphanage in relation to follow-up. And I really liked Jos's introduction when he talked about the new acronyms and new things. The new one for me from this conference was Human Rights Impact Assessment. Yeah. I've never seen that before at an IAIA conference, so HRIA, it's just good. Apparently it was a good session. I'm not knocking the people who were there, it's an important issue. One of the things for me personally is that for the last 11 years I've taught this unit at Murdoch University called Principles of EIA. And it's interesting and I was given that unit, it already existed before I took it on. And what are the principles of EIA? And when you look at it, and when I teach the course, I always notice, and I'm always sort of impressed, that the basics of EIA have never changed. I always start with NEPA, and NEPA has some amazing things in it that we just take for granted and forget about. And it has strategic stuff in it, if you read it that way. It has sustainability stuff in it, if you read that in that way. It doesn't use those words necessarily, but the meaning of the words it does employ back in 1969, basically, if you use a dictionary, you get something close to sustainability or strategic environmental assessment. So I always like going back to the basics. My students hate it. And I actually don't have the courage to ever give them a reading from the 70s. I use it in my own research, but I've never actually asked a student to read a paper from the 1970s. That's a decade or two before they were born. Most of them. So it's not popular, but I do give them stuff from the 80s.
Give them exam questions.
And talking about the 80s brings me to, I was at a session yesterday and I saw two papers on significance. And these were practitioners, they were good papers, but these were practitioners who were saying, this is how you work out significance in EIA. And guess what? There was not a single reference to the stuff from the 80s, which did all that work. So it's kind of like what I see about the orphanage is that we do pluck out the babies occasionally and do something with them, but we never go back and see what the father of or the mother of the baby, orphan, I suppose it's an orphan, you don't know who the father is, do you? Bugger! That's a useless analogy. So the point is we don't go back and learn from history. So, follow-up. I'd like to tell you the story of follow-up because Jos and I did our PhDs in this area, and it's how I sort of became part of this community. So when I did my PhD, I realised that there was some really important initial ideas in the 1970s. Andrews 1976 was one memorable paper, I seem to recall. And but it really happened, follow-up really got going in the 1980s. Why? Well, I think it was the 10-year anniversary for many EIA jurisdictions. I know the Americans were a bit ahead of the game in that regard, but by the mid-80s, it was sort of 10 years on, or 15 years on for many countries. So in 1985, the Banff boys, we have one here, the Banff boys got together. That was the audit and evaluation seminar, and it led to a 2-volume proceedings publication that Barry Sadler edited. And that was absolutely, when I started my research, that document was like precious material. Jos never saw an original copy of the Banff 2 volumes, and he's got a photocopy of it. It's like the 2 volumes come to about 600 pages, and I've seen it. He's got this, and it's precious to him, this precious photocopy of this entire report. I was lucky enough to have, there's a copy in my university library, and my PhD supervisor has a copy. So I used to work from the original. But and then there was a wonderful book by Paul Culhane in 1987, which was about prediction audits. And he was saying, what do we like at our prediction processes in EIA? And that book was really influential in my early research. In the 1990s, there were the doctors of follow-up. That was Jos, myself, and Ross Marshall. Just coincidentally, there were 3 of us, 3 different countries of the world. Within 1 year of each other, we all completed PhDs on follow-up. And so the 3 of us then, at Jos's instigation, subsequently got together from 2000 onwards. I started my work at Murdoch in 2000, and Jos emailed me out of the blue and said, are you coming to the Hong Kong IAA conference? We're doing something on follow-up. And so I went to IAA in 2000, and I've been to every single conference of IAA, the annual ones anyway, since that day. And between 2000 and 2004, Jos and I and Ross Marshall and others, there were quite a few Canadian regulators who were very interested in follow-up. We actually ran workshops where we asked people to share their stories about follow-up. And we ended up writing a book in 2004, an edited book of bringing these stories together, but we also published three articles in IAPA journal, and we did a special edition, didn't we? Shit, we were busy. In 2005, we did a special edition of the journal, bringing together all those stories. Now, since then, things have gone a bit quiet. There's a couple of papers per year at the conference, sort of typically, and there's 1 or 2 journal publications on follow-up that I'm aware of per year since then. One of the interesting things was, you know, there's the sections in IAIA. Jos and I were asked back in the mid-noughties if we would form a section on follow-up. And we said, no, we don't want to form a section on follow-up because everybody should do follow-up, not just a few geeky people who come and join the section. We want everyone to talk about follow-up, and we want follow-up not to be in special sessions, but to be dispersed across the conference and across the stakeholders of IAIA, our members. And guess what? It's kind of happened. Right now, there is a parallel session to this one, which has one paper on follow-up by Bizad, and he's talking about environmental management systems and follow-up. And there's also a parallel session on public participation and follow-up. Fantastic. So we didn't sectionalise, and we've seen it disperse. So I guess I'm not sure whether follow-up's an orphan or not, but it certainly remains important. And in many of the presentations I go to, one of the common comments is we need more, or we need better follow-up. So is there anything new or important to say about follow-up? I don't know. But I still think it's important. And is it in the orphanage? Well, probably, but let's have a debate about that. Over to you, Ross.
Okay.